informative speech. We got an audience here of Jared, Greg, Josh, and Jeffrey. And Frank's running the camera. Give away, Frank. All right, whenever you're ready, buddy. Is that good? Yeah. Okay, good. You get me all in? Audience, are you ready? Okay. My name is Josh Bozeman. This is the informative speech for introduction to public speaking online. This is my introductory, not my introductory, it's my informative speech, pardon me, called Horror Movies, the Evolution of a Genre. I have some visual aids too, so I'm going to try to do those at the same time. And what was my note cards here? Okay, everyone ready? Okay. Horror movies have a long and storied history. They have been around since filmmaking began. These films allow us as viewers to see in the deepest depths of the human psyche. We're encouraged to sit in darkened theaters with friends and strangers alike, waiting for that one big scare that we'll talk about for days to come around the water cooler and with our family members. Why do we do it, and how has the genre changed over the past century? Let us explore that a bit. We have become so accustomed to artificial scares in the safe confines of a movie palace that we already know the rules of basic horror movie survival. When Randy, the young teen protagonist in Scream, notes that there are certain rules you must abide by in order to successfully survive a horror film, we already know what he's going to say in terms of the rules before he even gets the first sentence out of his mouth. Now, the first horror movie fans wouldn't have known the list of rules, but they would have known the basic primal fears that we all share as humans, and these feelings make horror movies so exciting. Today's horror films are, in many ways, just as the first horror movies were. They're very scary. Technology may make the movies today more realistic and maybe perhaps even a bit scarier, but the realism doesn't even matter because the fundamental fears we all have are truly the same as those with the first horror movie fans. Those include death, pain, disease, the fear of weird creatures, the fear of the unknown, and basically the most root fear is the fear that we are all mortal. Many ascribe the label the world's first horror film to the 2-minute-long film from 1896 called La Manure de Diablo. It translates to the House of the Devil. The film contained bats and ghosts and goblins and even the devil himself. The film was actually more comedy than horror, but is still considered to be within the horror genre. The dark and dramatic tone of the film actually help it fit into the horror genre because it fits many of the basic conventions of horror cinema as we know them today. After this experiment in fear, filmmakers were able to delve into a new genre that would let them see the dark side of humanity. Even Edison Studios, formed by Thomas Edison, came up with their own horror film, Frankenstein. It was a short film, and this is the first time Frankenstein was ever on screen. In the first part of the 20th century, the German expressionist films really made a splash on the movie screen. They fit quite nicely into the horror genre and the conventions within it. These were the first full-length feature horror films. Nosferatu and The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari were two of the prime examples of the German expressionist horror films. These films used odd angles and weird disproportionate settings to create tension with the audience. They also created many ghoulish characters, including the vampire we're all familiar with in Nosferatu, the main character. Nosferatu is actually a ripoff of Bram Stoker's Dracula. It was very blatant, and the filmmakers were sued by the family of Bram Stoker because of it. Probably the most famous of the style of German expressionist films is Metropolis from 1927. It's a film that deals with very frightening futuristic scenarios and scenery that most audiences have never seen before. It's a mix of sci-fi and horror, but it does fit the horror genre. The horror genre was finally off and running now. The earliest horror cinema was filled with monsters, ghouls, and demons. The villains in the first films were often borrowed from religious imagery, mainly Christian practices. Church practices such as removing demons from people, exorcising demons from people, fighting evil spirits, and even more were the thing of legend for early horror cinema movies. Christian traditions such as the visions of hell, the devil himself, the fight between good and evil, between good men and good men and bad men in black and white terms, these were fodder for the earliest horror movies on the screen. The supernatural was explored in early films as well, and it's still seen often today. Monsters, both real and imagined, have played a major role in early horror cinema. Movie monsters such as Dracula made the movie scene in the early 1930s and the 1940s. These included Dracula, the Mummy, and Frankenstein, the Wolfman, and other monsters, thanks mostly in part to Universal Pictures.